Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center. Not in San Antonio, Texas today. I am at Clayton Studios in St. Louis, Missouri with the wonderful Michael Silverman. Stick around. We've got great conversation. We got concert video. We got all kind of stuff coming to you. You're going to love it. As promised, I am here at Clayton Studios with the wonderful Michael Silverman. And what brought us together literally at this point is this instrument right here.
Right.
And go ahead, tell me all about it.
Well, I'll tell you, I just got it maybe a week and a half ago. They brought it into the studio. I love it. It's the Kawai, Shigeru Kawai. And this is the 7-foot, just short of 7-foot version, SK6, I believe, is the model number, right?
Dream instrument.
Yes, and it's absolutely amazing. I was sold on the Kawai because I own a couple of Steinways. I had a Steinway in the studio for a long time. It is a really nice instrument. I took it home, but the thing that I really got into about Kawai, first of all, first time I played all of the pianos in the Kawai Piano Gallery in St. Louis. Is basically the top 2 feet of the piano. The top 2 feet of the keys are so clear, they sound better than any piano I've ever played. They're really, really incredibly clear. And I recommend everyone check out Kawai's and just play the top. I mean, I found myself just playing up there, and usually it gets a little cloudy and weird up there, and it's the only one that isn't, and I don't know what it is. I know that there's the carbon fiber action.
Right.
And I think that might be the reason, but I don't really understand the science. But anyway, that's one of the main things that got me into the instrument. They just sound great.
They are a wonderful instrument,
yeah.
and I'm thrilled that you have one. And I like this little recording rig that you have set up across there with the microphones. And
yeah,
I'm excited about hearing some stuff. And in the last, I'd say week or 10 days, I've been listening to a lot of Michael's music online. And just real quick, give me a summary of where you are on the internet in terms of downloads, listens, streams, sheet music sales, and self-made students off of all of your work.
Oh, geez. I would say, I mean, the big number is on streams, we're at over 7 billion.
That's a lot of streams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems to be at about a rate of 1 billion a year right now, which
That's
is kind
phenomenal.
Yeah, just tons of solo piano music.
And now, how many albums do you
out.
have that you told me you had now?
950.
That's a lot. That's a lot of work.
Now, many of them are compilations of other stuff, so I don't even know how many actual original albums there are, but they're in the hundreds for sure.
Understood. That is just wonderful. And I found out through the course of conversation that you have a lot of experience teaching piano as well as not just performing and writing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we've been visiting for a while, and I've been trying to do like background investigative work. And I found out the best thing is just like, these answers are phenomenal.
Okay.
I want to know, I'm going to ask again for the camera.
Sure.
What is your introduction to the piano like? How did you first come across the piano? How old were you? And when did that happen? And what did it mean to you? And then as you were learning, tell me about some of your milestones and some of the first goals, like figuring out 3 chords and stretching an octave. And because I know you started when you were young and all that. So tell me a bit about your journey.
So, my brother and my brother's Rob Silverman, he's a great drummer, and he is 4 years older than me, and I think my primary music teacher in life.
Oh, that's great for you.
I mean, he's actually phenomenal at improvising on the piano. But he was figuring things out when I was just tiny, And so the way it all started was my parents are musicians. My mother was a piano teacher. My father played cello in the St. Louis Symphony. But back then the symphony was a really, really low paying job, and they struggled, and they couldn't afford a piano actually. And somebody gave them a piano they said was in such bad shape that they were going to throw it in the junkyard. They said, but we will drop it at your house if you want it. And so they gave it to it right when I was born. And so that's the piano we grew up on. And then it was a half step flat the entire time I was growing up. So I had no shot in the world of perfect pitch because it was never. And they said if you try to tune it, the thing will probably just fall apart. It was just that bad. But my brother and I, we banged on it. And we learned to play it.
You got through it.
Yeah, and most of the ivories were gone. It was just like these blocks of wood with like this kind of gluey, uneven surfaces. But we learned to play on it. We used to play duets all the time when we were little, and we'd write these things. And but yeah, my brother somehow he just sort of figured out how to go up and down scales and improvise, and he would show me when I was very little. And so that's really the introduction. At one point, there was a friend of my father's who worked for the Carson show, you know, the Tonight Show, and he was over and he saw my brother and I doing this thing, and he got super excited and he told us, "Okay, I'm going to book you guys on Carson," which never happened, and it scared the hell out of me actually, because I thought, you know, I was a very shy kid.
That would have been.
But he was like, "I'm going to put you guys," and my brother was all excited.
Well, yeah, that would have been. Yeah, that's
anyway,
a big audience.
That's a funny thing. Yeah, it was the scariest thing anyone ever said to me. I mean, I was kind of like I was, you know, post-traumatic for a couple of days after, because I was like, I guess I have to do this thing. You know, I thought it was, but it never came to fruition, thank God.
Well, let me ask you something. What has worked for you professionally the best? And was it things that you had roadmapped or planned on, or things that were unplanned? And then, or was there anything that was kind of like just pure luck and magic? Musical magic.
Well, I think that being reasonably self-taught and so on, even though I had a very musical family, it was still very by ear, very, hey, let me show you a little thing.
Yeah, but you were surrounded by constant critics, I'm sure.
Of course, yeah. So, I mean, that was just the way that I learned to play. I never really thought this was a way that a real musician would become a real musician, so I didn't even believe that I was going to be a musician. I went off to college thinking I was going to be, you know, I was a psych major. Even though I was already playing in bands and playing gigs with my brother, I just didn't seem realistic, even though I was like, well, this is what I really like to do, but, you know,
right.
You know. But anyway, so what happened, though, was that, I was teaching a little bit, and already, as a teenager, I was teaching. And that's been a super important part of my life, is just being able to have students, and that helped me to develop a lot.
Right. They challenge you, don't they?
Yeah, always.
Yes.
Always. My students taught me things. I became a better reader. I learned to actually transcribe music the whole time, because I was writing out most of my lessons by hand. And that was like, I can use this to make myself much better, too.
Right.
So my point, getting to your question, at that point, like in my early 20s, my brother and I, we were recording jingles for just local TV spots and things like that. We were playing in the band. We joined every kind of band that we could.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So we played in a Jewish wedding band. My brother played in a Greek band. We played all kinds of top 40 bands. And, of course, we were really into, like, progressive rock and jazz fusion and that kind of thing. I also loved George Winston. Was like a completely different personality.
Right.
I feel like that's another half of me. It's
Right.
this sort of like new age thing. But anyway, so we were just doing a lot of things, and my belief is that luck is not really how it works. I think it's that we were trying to do a lot of things, and that if you're doing a lot of things, people notice all these things you can do. And we were getting into recording and all that. We could talk about that in a minute.
Right.
But we were doing everything we could do. We were trying to learn every aspect of music. We were making instruments by hand. We were talking earlier off camera about the Zen drum, the drumatar instrument.
Right.
It's an electronic drum instrument. My brother and I were building one of our own. And then that company came along and they had this drumatar instrument. And my brother immediately became an endorser for that company. We dropped ours. But the point is, we wanted to know everything from producing and writing and directing choirs or whatever, every opportunity we took. And I think if you just do that, you're bound to have some success, And so at some point, we started to really record a lot of music. And it was the solo piano stuff that really took off. That's been by far our biggest seller.
And what year did that happen at?
So late 2007, started to just record classical pieces, classical favorites. and I usually play them in sort of a George Winston style.
Right.
So I even take like Beethoven and Mozart and Bach and those pieces, and I made them a little more contemporary. Like I took out things that in my mind sounded like sort of Baroque ornamentation and made them a little bit more accessible for an audience that doesn't know that music. And that became sort of my own classical style, in my head. So, and it seemed to really work. I mean, those started to sell, and they were selling just enough that I could sort of slow down on my teaching a little bit and focus more on recording. And then I recorded an album called The Christmas Piano.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, and so it was one of those things, and I think it's like how marketing works, in that I couldn't find the Christmas record I was looking for. I wanted to hear a truly kind of a serene, simple Christmas record, not a show-off jazz piano Christmas thing. And I like those too. I love like David Benoit's Christmas records and things like that.
Gotcha.
I love Vince Guaraldi. But sometimes I just wanted to hear one where the melody was the center of it.
Right.
And the harmony was not thick, and I wanted spacious, like,
right.
And so I recorded that record, and it went to #1 on Christmas Day 2008 on the classical iTunes chart, and that was a huge thing for me.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and so after that, I was just like, I pretty much cut out everything I didn't want to do in my life, and I was able to just focus on it and record all the time.
Isn't it funny that I've often found that, I had 20 some odd years in the business world, about exactly 18 of them in the banking business, and I often found that the people that had a plan and worked real hard at it got really lucky and experienced all kind of magic, okay? But it didn't really have a lot to do with leprechauns and luck like that. They didn't sit around and wait for it to happen. They made it happen.
Right.
And we talk a lot about sales, but sales is one of those things, well, there's a drawer there with A through Z. Write them all a letter. Tell them who you are. I bet before you get to G or H, you got someone calling you up, asking you questions, wanting to buy something. That's
Right.
what you're looking for.
Right.
It doesn't happen unless you make it happen.
Right.
And that's certainly why your career is where it is, because you made it happen that way. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? I'll tell you what amazes me. It's not so much that you hit all these major milestones, like business and success-wise, people listening to your stuff and taking it down and learning from it. And you said they're also taking down, they're buying the sheet music of your arrangements, which is incredible.
Yeah.
That makes you like a great teacher, but you don't have any students. They're all out there. They're out there.
Yeah.
And then you probably get a lot of emails and letters and all kind of hey, I love your arrangement. Can you do this song? How many of those do you do? You get tons of requests, right?
Yeah, in fact, that's when I add to my sheet music collection, is when someone sends me a letter and says, there's this piece that, we love. And believe about half of these requests, by the way, have to do with, we wanted to perform it as a gift for somebody or at a wedding.
Right.
Those are really common, but then I'm like, oh yeah, and I'll give it to them for free. And then I stick it up on the sheet music store.
Right. What amazes me, I guess, is that as recently, in the solo piano world, I mean, people that know solo piano know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Is that this happened in like 08 and 09 for you.
Right.
And by that time, I mean, people that we kind of find like that Kevin Bacon thing are not far between us. They're like Jim Brickman. Mm-hmm. He'd been at it over 20 years at that point.
Absolutely.
Had a huge career, but in 08 and 09, if he wasn't doing concerts, he wasn't really pulling in. I mean, record business has changed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a big label. There's no fat guys with cigars getting rich off of everyone's labor anymore. They've been cut out. The musicians, well, they're not fat guys with cigars, but they're working on it. Mm-hmm. Well, they're managing their own stuff, which is really incredible. The other thing, I had a couple things. We talked a lot about, recording and putting songs together and all that kind of stuff. How old were you when you made your first multi-track recording of anything that was like a song? And what kind of gear that you can remember did you use? Like a keyboard? Was it digital? Was it acoustic? And was your gear analog or was it digital? Was it a multi-track? Just briefly, what kind of stuff was it? I know that's a lot in one thing, but it's your creative process that
I would say that the first recording we did, I had a friend named Mark Spielberg. He has in St. Louis, a company called Spielberg Audio Labs. He builds incredible speakers. Okay. And he has an incredible home studio. But back then in the 80s, when we were all teenagers, he had some kind of a recording device, and he set up basically in a closet in our basement as this control room.
Cool.
And it was the first time he recorded our band, and it was just so exciting to hear this stuff being recorded. We had a really weird, I was really, I was a teenager in the 80s, and I was just discovering Chick Corea's electric band, and a kind of like electric fusion thing.
Right.
And progressive rock stuff like Rush,
Right.
and Yes, and that kind of stuff. So we were in this sort of weird zone of like just trying to do interesting, experimental.
So it was
stuff.
original stuff you were recording.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, we immediately started writing kind of synthesizer-based, electric fusion stuff. And my brother had a double bass drum set with millions.
Super cool.
And he would be Neil Peart meets Dave Weckl. That was his, he's still that way. Those are his two idols.
Gotcha.
So we were recording this crazy stuff. We were all playing as fast as we could, trying to play in every time signature we could. And that was the beginning. And it's funny because now, this many years later, that's still my favorite thing. We still basically do the same thing. We do, really wild instrumental
So
music.
you guys were teenagers, and you had someone recording your gear on some kind of 4-track?
I think it was a TIAC.
A TIAC?
Remember? Yeah,
Okay.
if that's how you say it. Teak or TIAC.
TIAC, yeah.
And at the time, I had a Roland Juno 106, and I had a Casio's most professional instrument, the CZ 1000.
Oh, yeah.
Which I thought was amazing. You could play 4 notes at once.
Yeah.
But I really was sort of like, at this point in my life where I wasn't really, I banged on the piano as a kid, but now that I had keyboard sounds, and I had synthesizer, I had these big brass sounds, and big, like, just synthesizer sounds that don't sound like any acoustic instrument. I just thought that was heaven. So I had these huge kind of Tony Banks Genesis things going on, or Rush, and I was just making this crazy music with that. And that's, it's funny. I'm still into it.
I do have to ask you this question, though.
Yeah.
This is one, and I think you might be at that age where this is the break point question.
Yeah.
What is your Fender Rhodes experience? Do you have a Fender Rhodes experience or a CP70 or Wurlitzer experience?
I am just young enough, I think, to have always loved Fender Rhodes sounds, like the DX7 electric piano that is at the time was considered a very bad representation of the Rhodes. But I actually like the FM version of a Rhodes sound. And to this day, I still love FN virtual instruments. I still, I'm just kind of stuck in that sound. I love that. And I layer that with pianos like a lot of fusion guys do, with a little bit of a pad in there.
Right.
And that's my core sound.
So you're not a guy that carried around a Fender Rhodes.
I had one for a minute. I had one for a minute, and it was in terrible shape. And I never took it out, and I got rid of it. And I just said, and the other thing, it was just a headache.
Okay. There is something that I want to ask. If we could maybe get a couple minutes. I have this one question, and then I have the brag time question, which we discussed, which is where he's going to name off all the people he's jammed with and done shows.
I'll do my best.
That's I think would be a good one, at least to end this segment with.
Sounds
and then
good.
I have some other ideas. But right now I want to focus on, I'm really just amazed at your ability to sell yourself as a musician, as a performer, as a guy that writes his own sheet music and sells it. But what I'm amazed at is the level of teaching experience that you have, that it does not even, it's something that never crosses people's mind when they're listening to you play. It's like, this guy don't play like a teacher. This guy don't look like a teacher. This guy is like a musician. Okay, so my question is, and I ask this to teachers all the time, I want some opinion on a 5.5 and a 6.0 scale.
Okay.
And we're not going to define it. Just go and talk on it. We'll discuss it later. And it looks like we have just a few minutes left here on the film. So,
all right. Having just learned for the first time in my life that there was a different scale of piano keys that used to exist, and a couple of them, as you say, that were smaller. And in fact, in the time of Beethoven, they were smaller. Reaching an octave was not that big a deal for an adult man or woman. Women, apparently, I think the stat was like 60% of women cannot reach an octave. I could be wrong about that being exactly right, close. But I think it is. And so you think all of those women who just never, just 60% of them can, an octave is a pretty sort of fundamental thing to do on most music.
Right.
So if they immediately have to cut octaves out of their playing, I think it's very discouraging. And so I watched this guy on YouTube whose life mission was to retrofit existing pianos with these shorter scale keys and key beds. And the women who came in and played, especially women, came in and played, and they cried because they could finally play. These are, people who were serious pianists, but they just could never play the music that they wanted to play. They couldn't play everything they wanted, and suddenly they could. And
not just an octave, but a tenth. Some of them, the ones that could reach an octave, can reach a tenth.
Right. For me, an octave is fine. A ninth is fine. I have to work for a tenth, and I generally avoid them.
Gotcha.
Because of that. And you think all the George Winston music that moves
Right,
tenths
right.
all the time. Well, I have my own way of handling that. I always have to come up with my own way and I have normal sized average hands, I think. But that's not easy.
It's an interesting challenge. It shouldn't be.
It's ridiculous because Beethoven played on a piano with smaller
thinner keys. Essentially, the smaller scale means thinner keys.
Right. Yeah. So literally, the width of the keys is just millimeter.
So you're well familiar because of all your students you had that had trouble reaching an octave.
I taught so many students how to do fifths in the left hand, because they're kids. First of all, a lot of them were kids, but even the adults, a lot of them couldn't do it.
Right.
So yeah, I always thought it was. It just never occurred to me that it was anything else. It's like, well, I guess you have to have big hands to play those big parts, but it's not how it's always been. So I do encourage piano companies to be the one to do it.
Right.
Because they'd own the market.
There's sales there.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna take a break here. We're gonna listen to some stuff. We're gonna have some demos, and we're gonna continue conversation in just a bit. This is Ted with Alamo Music Center, but we are at Clayton Studios here in St. Louis, Missouri, with Michael Silverman, who's going to give us all kind of demos, and we've got more footage coming up. Stick around, and thank you for listening.
Thank you all so much. Matt Pickard, Matt Bowinger, Hannah Silverman, Rob Silverman. My name is Mike Silverman. Check us out on MySpace. Thank you so much. We're back to the future.
And we're back.
Coming
That
up
was
next, Ryan Marquez.
wonderful performance.
Why, thank
I
you.
mean, we've been listening to Michael Silverman, and again, as a reminder for those of you that joined us during the concert footage, we are at Clayton Studios here in St. Louis, Missouri, not in San Antonio. And what we're doing is we're doing an extensive interview with Michael Silverman. We're kind of bringing him as he came into the Kawai Piano Gallery here in St. Louis. We talked about this piano, and we had some pretty good conversation leading up to the concert footage. I just wanted to recap briefly. We're in agreement on so many things, and it's fascinating because he's got a really great history of piano and teaching, and we agreed so much I didn't even have to say anything. But the bottom line is this: we both feel that both the 5.5 and the 6.0 octave scale, I think there's millions of units to be sold on an annual basis, assuming that keyboard manufacturers, all the ones that we know of, should at least consider making, in my mind, a wooden key, properly weighted. Whether it's got real or simulated action is a different story, but it should be a properly weighted kind of keyboard, and it should be 5.5 and 6.0. Wooden key, professional, should have like a good grand piano sound in it, not necessarily a 9-foot, maybe a 7-foot would be great. And a good kind of power system and speaker system, just so it was better sounding than a spin-it piano, and it would play, but it would have the right scale for millions and millions of people that have given up on piano because they can't reach an octave. And also fit that statistic where I believe it's like at least 80% of the piano teachers in the world are female, and they can't reach a 10th, which is kind of required for Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and Liszt, and what they call the masters. And that keeps people with smaller hands from competing on a competitive, which I don't believe a lot of piano players think that competitions are for horses, but at the piano level for Chopin, Tchaikovsky, and the Van Cliburn competitions, it would be open. I think what we would find if these instruments were available over time is that there'll be a younger age, instead of having these 19, actually late teenagers to early 20-year-olds. And the only reason why they're hitting at that age is because their hands are getting that size. And it would, the piano competitions at Chopin, Tchaikovsky, and Van Cliburn, within a matter of 5-6 years, will have 9 to 12-year-olds in it.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
And I think the worldwide, the Teacher Association, the guild technicians, all these people are afraid of having all these young ones playing phenomenally on the piano and running all the other people out of the business.
Well,
in terms of teaching.
You got to think, I mean, in professional sports, you know, you're still going to be 18, 19, 20, 21, and you're going to have an advantage over your average 13-year-old.
Well,
but
they make basketball hoops. They make short bats.
But that's right.
Okay, they make everything small but piano keys.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think it's a great idea, and those kids will be great, and there will be a lot more great kids who could play. But even, I think maybe even more important, I don't know, equally important, is that a lot more women would stick with it and rise to a higher level. Because they can actually reach the keys that are written. Because there's too much music written that is out of their range.
That's my whole thinking is that, we're going to have great players, younger ones who win competition. So what? My thing is, what kind of compositions for the piano literature are we going to get out of these budding pianists when they're actually brilliant composers, and they're guys like brainiacs, you know, like Debussy and Brahms on piano, and they're just, you know, people that can reach it, you know, play a piano.
And also me, I'm a professional piano player. I'm 51. I'm a man with average size hands. I'd still be able to play more things if I could reach more things.
Speaks for itself, you know.
I mean, I would love to try. I have yet to try this. I've watched footage of people doing it and just loving it.
Well, I read an article by a guy that was scheduled to compete in a competition. A piano like this size. But he chased down in the city where the competition was, I think it was in Vienna, he chased down a 6.0 scale and thought, I may screw this up for the rest of my life. I don't know, but I'm going to play my piece on that 6.0.
This sounds very familiar,
And he sat there and he played it, not once, twice, 3 times, and the guy said, I know he didn't say it in an article, but I know this guy just had massive amounts of confidence. And he went and played the best he's ever played on a large piano after he just pounded in that confidence of, I know
Yes.
this piece.
Right.
And that's what's lacking the whole time when you're not sure you can reach, because there's compromises on those octaves
Exactly.
and tenths, which leads me to something. I think we've kind of hammered that subject on.
Okay.
But what I want to get to is
Yeah.
this is what I really dig when you come across like professional pianist guy been playing
Yeah.
and recording and jamming since he was a kid and getting other musicians involved. I tried to do that, and I just got frustrated and did a lot of duo stuff, a lot of solo stuff, or work one-on-one with other people, because we put a lot of time into trying to make good sounding recordings and good quality sounds. But overall, it comes down to this. What kind of pianos have you used throughout your career? Because I know you didn't always have a Shigeru Kawai.
No, this is the best piano I've ever played, but I've played many, many pianos. And, you know, I have tried to not get to be too fancy. When I was younger, I just thought, there were so many pianos in people's living rooms that I just loved because they just sounded, you know, strange sometimes. They were so different, and they had personalities, and I would just fall in love with, like, you know, this student's piano. I go, this little spin it, or this, or they're grand, or something new, or something old. They just all sounded different. The pedals operated differently, and I just always kind of like, I'd play certain things on certain pianos, and I used to think, well, a piano's a piano as long as it's in tune.
No quirks, challenges.
Yeah, and I would just love that. And I remember seeing a video with the great Richard T, who was saying the same thing. He'd go into recording studios, and they were never optimal pianos. And he would just say, before we do a session, I'd spend an hour just like seeing what this piano does. Because if it has a nice dark thing about it, if it's, you know, if there's an unevenness, you live with it. But if whatever the thing is that piano happens to do, I'm going to really take advantage of that. So that's cool.
Right.
I think that professional piano players in general, when they go to play pianos in a music store or wherever, they will try to find a piano that isn't too bright or too dark, right? It's just like this, you're looking for that thing in the middle where they can get bright and they can get dark, and they can, so they, you know, the largest, you know, range of dynamics and frequency that they can get. Generally, I think that's what piano players go for. And when I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm going to go buy my first great piano, I went to a Steinway store. And what was really amazing to me was, I went in there and I played all the pianos, and there was only one that was kind of acceptable. And I thought, this is crazy. I mean, these are the whole room of Steinways, all different sizes, the A's and the B's and the O's and the D's, and I mean, everything. And I was like, this is just amazing that I'm not really that impressed with most of them. And I found one I really, really loved. And I bought that one. And then the more I learned about it, I learned that Steinways are, you know, they're handmade, so they're all individual. So those other pianos will be great for other people. You know, they'll find their homes. But
did you find the one for you?
I found the one for me.
That's all that matters.
I still own that piano, and I love it.
Wonderful.
And I still love it. I was about 11 years ago now. So I own that one. Here's an interesting little aside that has to do with Kawai. In that Steinway store, they also had their lower end, or sort of their medium level, called the Bostons.
Mm-hmm.
Bostons are great pianos. In fact, they were truly great because they were cheaper, maybe half the price of the equivalent Steinway branded ones, but they were consistently good.
Yeah.
None of them was quite as great as the Steinway that I bought. But all of them were close. And they were all close. They were all very consistent. They said, well, those are our, you know, Asian-produced sort of factory pianos. They're very good, but they're not the Steinways, you know? And I thought, I think if I was, like, traveling around and we went into a theater and they had a Boston, I felt much more comfortable than if there was a Steinway, because I knew it would be good.
When they first came out with that line, every time I went to a gig and there was a Boston, I was happy because I knew one thing: it's a brand new piano.
Yeah, well, that's true, because they were new, right?
It's a brand new piano.
The Steinways could be from
less than 5 years old.
Right?
It's less than 6 years old. It's less than 7 years old. Someone hadn't destroyed it.
That's also true. Newer pianos are generally better than old pianos. I used to think, like an old piano was like a fine wine. Not usually.
Yeah.
I mean,
they play like
well
an old
maintained
piano,
could be
you don't
okay.
want it.
It's like an old car.
Right.
It might be okay.
Right.
It's probably not.
Yeah, but you know, an old piano, That the kind that you're talking about that you don't really want, it's not really like an old car. It's more like an old bicycle. Like who the hell wants that?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
it just comes down to it. I mean, after a while, it's what it is. You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, if you rebuild it, then it's essentially a new piano. So there's that. But anyway, so here's the point about that. Boston pianos are actually produced by Kawai.
Correct.
That was the point.
Correct.
And I didn't know that at the time, but I thought these are kind of amazing, and they're a lot cheaper, and that's Steinway's having another company make them. Okay. Then later when I discovered the Kawais, which is fairly recently, like within the last year, really sitting down and really playing Kawais and just being knocked out.
Right.
Because I thought, why don't we know about this? I think Steinway is amazing at marketing themselves. I've studied all of that too. They are just the best marketers in the world.
There's something I wanted to tell you about Steinway that's really important. It just takes a minute or two. Is that Steinway was the most available piano in New York City. And don't forget what happened in New York City when radio first came out, and they needed people singing and playing music on the air. Well, radio was all over the country, but the kingpin place to be employed in radio was New York City.
Sure.
So you had the bigger cities. So New York City, every radio station had what kind of piano in it?
Steinway.
Okay, and so every recording studio had what kind of piano in it back then in the 30s and
Steinway,
40s?
maybe?
Okay, so what is probably the most heard, and most recorded piano in the world is going to be a Steinway and Sons. So it's naturally that it's the most known piano and the most best known marketed.
But they
piano.
have worked all these years to stay on top in terms of people think Steinway. That's all they know.
They think Steinway is the king of piano.
Yeah.
And they don't know about, most of them don't know about Bluthner. They don't know about Bosendorfer. They don't know about Grotian or a lot of these other phenomenal names, including the Shigeru Kawai line. But Boston pianos, I mean, I got real excited about them because when I saw them in venues, it's like, it's a good instrument.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of a really cool thing. And everyone has a Steinway story, and everyone has a Steinway save story. Pulled it out of a barn, used to, had it retrofitted, but I kept the original soundboard, holes and all.
Right.
And those are the better sounding pianos. I mean, whatever anyone says. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I kind of have an idea, digital or analog?
Okay. I guess I come down on digital. On a scientific level, it just has the widest frequency range. Who we're talking about CDs as opposed to. Are we talking instruments or?
I'm talking instruments right now.
Okay, let's get into instruments.
And the other thing I wanted to ask is that.
Okay.
Remember now, what includes both digital and analog right now is some of what's on Zach's channel. These new synths that come out, like used to be a big machine, now you get in a little box.
Right.
Have you fooled with any of those things? And do you fool with those things? And if you haven't,
I
think you need to watch this channel because there's some really cool
So I have a
gadgets
Chord
out
Prologue, and I believe it is an analog digital hybrid. If
Okay.
I'm correct, I believe I'm right.
Your Chord Prologue?
I believe it is. I mean, it certainly acts completely analog. And then it has a
I'll tell you what.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I
Cameraman
thought.
says yes.
I'll tell you what I thought of when we were kind of discussing this earlier. As I thought of this, the one thing about digital that I loved when it hit synthesizers. Okay, and if you're an old school keyboard player where you had a stack of stuff and they call a different song, you had to reset all your stuff.
Right.
The thing that digital, I thought this is going to make it. Is that it memorized analog settings, that Prophet 600.
Right. That's why I like the Prologue.
90 is this song. When they call that, I put in 20, 30. Okay, so you had these sounds. But the sounds were not digital. It was an analog produced, just the memory of the settings. And I thought, they could stay like this forever. Because now they got MIDI.
Yeah.
Okay, it could stay like this forever.
It was the best of both worlds.
That wasn't good enough. Right. They had to get rid of all the analog stuff and make it digital.
Right.
And I think even to this day, and when CDs and albums, because the next question is CD or vinyl, but when vinyl first came over to CD, some CDs were horrible sounding because they just took the same pressing.
That's exactly right.
My favorite ones were analog recordings, digital remastering, and digital format. Okay.
I agree.
And to this day,
that's
if someone says, "Hey Ted, we're going to go in the studio and you want to make your 1970s quote unquote singer-songwriter album, how you want to do it?" I don't care if we use tape or not. If someone said it's in the last room backing it up, that's great, but I want an analog board.
Right.
I want an analog board, and then you go to the digital recorder and use some tubes to warm it up. Just make it sound like it's on old tape. Don't add any hiss in, but that's
right. The good part of analog.
There's great parts of digital and there's great parts of analog. When you put the two together, it's phenomenal. But for the longest time, it went all digital keyboards or all analog keyboards. It was like someone put a hatchet line right down the middle.
Well, I'll tell you a little about Clayton Studios very quickly.
Do please.
Our philosophy, about 5 years ago, I bought it. This is St. Louis's oldest recording studio. It was very, very like wired up like 1975, you know? And so we took all of that out and we put all digital rooms in and everything. But the thing that I was most excited about was analog, reproductions of plugins and, channel strips, all that stuff. And we used analog preamps. We used tube mics and so on. So there was an analog stage going in. Then we used a lot of slate digital stuff. We used the Waves, Shep's Omni-channel. We used a bunch of stuff that is emulations of analog.
Right.
And that's great. And we even have microphone emulations as plugins. I mean, we do all the stuff.
I've never fooled with those.
And think about this. This is really where I turned the corner on really getting an analog sound with all the advantages of digital was once you start putting the same channel strip on every channel. I'm getting a little in the weeds here. But the point was we were emulating the way a board really works, which is everything kind of starts out with the same signal path and you can make adjustments.
Right.
Once we all started doing that, suddenly records started sounding like records the way I knew them. And so I'm never going back to analog stuff other than, we're actually considering getting a big analog board just as an input stage. And after that, once it's in the computer, it's in the box.
It stays in digital.
So it's really digital, but all we're doing is looking back at all the good analog stuff and trying to get the best out of it,
Okay, so I have another question to ask you as a performer. We've talked a little bit about challenges, and we've said stuff like, hey, have you ever done anything where you write down chords and let's do this? And you've given some really restrictive things. But what I wanted to ask you is, have you ever had any experience as a pianist with anything that is related to theater? Whether it was a musical production, and you were either just a rehearsal pianist or the musical director or a Broadway musical or anything that involved dancers. Because these are experiences that make piano players pull their hair out.
Right.
Okay, and you know exactly what I'm talking about because dancers look at music in an entirely different way than a musician does.
Right.
A musician is counting stuff, and a musician has got, is it 8 or 12 or where's it come in? And a dancer is already downstream. They look at music like a river that flows in every bend. They don't count those measures and stuff because
they count eights through everything,
and they need to hear if it's got that blink blink blink. If you don't do that blink blink blink, that's their cue is gone.
That's their cue, right?
So, what's your experience with that?
I'll tell you what, I've done probably a lot of the same things you've done. Just taking whatever gig I could at the time when I was younger, doing all kinds of things like that. But the one that was the most interesting along that line was working with an improv group in St. Louis.
Wild Cards.
An improv comedy troupe.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And it actually kind of informs what I want to do next with my music career. But I'm thinking back how much fun that was. We didn't have rehearsals. It was an improv group. They would do this thing they were called paperclip.
No wonder you liked it.
Maybe
a typical musician thing to like. No rehearsals, just show up for the show.
Well, really, it allowed me to just have fun with it. Right. But it was called the Paperclip Theater or the Paperclip Improv Group or something like that.
That's cool name.
With Ed Reggie. Great local legend in all these things, acting and improv and stuff. But what we would do, they would just put on things where they would go to the audience and they would say, just write almost random words on page. Throw it all up on the page and on the stage, and we will read them and we will weave it into the story. And it was silly, but I got to do. It would turn into a spy thing, and it was a science fiction thing, and it was a romantic thing, and I would just play. And mostly I would use a combination of like a piano with some kind of strings or pads or something, so that when I played heavy, I could get a big fat. And then when I played soft, it was lush, and I could make tons of scenery.
Right.
I could create a lot of different textures with that. And so I had more fun doing that than anything that was super planned out in terms of like playing in a theater thing or playing with
Those
dance
are rough.
groups.
Those are rough gigs.
They're really hard.
And they're exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the kind of things you come home from and just like, what did I do? What did I get myself into?
I had a cabaret group that I worked with, and I mean, not only did you have to learn songs, but every moment of it stopped the right amount of time for them to make the joke and the timing of the joke and
wait for them to laugh.
And then wait for the laugh, and then blink, like you were saying, and blink, blink, and then you go back. Like everything had to happen, and it becomes second nature when you've done it enough. But the rehearsals were just grueling.
You know who had problems with that? The timing and the humor, and a lot of that was worked out in the early days of Hollywood by the Marx Brothers, because they did all this stuff live, and they would go take their shtick and go put it on film. And it's like the director, no, you got to slow down. The audience is going to be laughing. Don't go to your next joke yet. You got to give them time, so it just kind of looks silly in between there.
Right.
Like they do it on
sitcom,
stage.
right?
Yeah, okay.
People just stand there for a second,
right? And wait till the laugh. So
right.
I didn't hear what he said. I was too busy laughing.
Right.
Okay, and so like. That's kind of the thing to work out the timing.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to get X number of people show to where they're going like a marching band.
Right.
And because all the side people and the stuff like that. And it's I think that is public theater or that kind of stuff that you get involved in is the one that requires the most mercy on your patience, man. It really does, because it's trying.
Right.
And just as a pianist, because they just think, hey, can you do this? Can you raise it up a half step? Well, yeah, but blacks are not white and whites aren't black. I gotta, I'm going up in the different colors over here because it's just black and white, but I'm used to doing it for 45, 50 years one way.
Yeah.
It's like, let's sit down and play Piano Man in B because my harmonica's in B.
Well, please no.
I mean, who can do that like that?
Right.
Okay, I knew a guy that actually learned it in B because it would match his harmonica, and he could sing it. He couldn't hit the G anymore. He had to come in on an F sharp. I said, "Man, just sing it an octave lower, or get some drunk to do it."
Right.
You're in a bar.
Yeah, that would be tough. I agree.
Okay, I think this is a good spot here. This is Ted with Alamo Music Center at Clayton Studios in St. Louis, Missouri, with the wonderful Michael Silverman. He's sharing his studio, his piano, his stories, and he's shared his music and people playing with him. He's got more to share. Stick around.